In this video, we're digging into two seriously chilling stories that went down deep in the remote parts of the Appalachian Mountains. The first one's about a couple who got home after a party and realized they were completely surrounded. With no one around for miles, the woods became their only shot at making it out. It's one of those stories that hits hard and really shows how trusting your gut can save your life out there. The second one, man, it still creeps me out. It's totally unsolved. And I don't want to give too much away, but it messed with me, and I knew I had to share it with you. As always, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments. I haven't been able to reply to everyone, but I do read them all. Thanks for watching. Now, let's get into the video. And remember, viewer discretion is advised. My name is Mark, and both my wife and I have lived in the Appalachian Mountains since the day we were born. This rugged, deep land is as much a part of us as we are of it. We chose to stay here, where we grew up, not just because it's the place we know best, but because life out here, tough as it may be, offers a kind of freedom and connection to nature that no other place ever could. We live in an area that, for obvious reasons, I'd rather not disclose. Not out of distrust, but because it's too isolated and remote to be on any map or in the ears of people who don't belong to this way of life. Around here, the farmhouses are spaced out by long stretches of land and dense forest, and our nearest neighbors are about a 32-minute drive away, which, in this region with narrow, often rough roads, might as well be an eternity when time matters. There are two absolutely essential things anyone needs to survive in these mountains. Especially in the more remote areas, where it's just you, your family, the forest, and everything that hides, moves, or watches within it. First, you have to respect the forest and every living thing in it. From the smallest animals to the unseen presences you can feel more than you can see. Second, and maybe even more important, you have to respect yourself and your instincts. When something deep inside you says something's wrong, you'd better err on the side of caution rather than ignore it. It doesn't matter if others say you're imagining things, if they call you paranoid, or even if you try to reason it away yourself. Out here, ignoring your instincts can get you killed. Developing that sixth sense, that inner voice, is one of the first and most vital skills anyone has to master to survive in this environment. Over the years, we've gathered plenty of stories and experiences that are hard to explain to folks who don't live here. Encounters with creatures in the woods, figures that peek from the shadows, and even people who seem too strange to truly belong to the world of the living. Anyone familiar with the Appalachians knows exactly what I mean. But this story isn't about any of those legends or creatures. This is one of those stories that, no matter how hard I try to keep it buried, still comes back to visit me at night. That particular night, my wife and I had gone to a party in one of the neighboring towns. It was harvest season, a time when these parts come alive with almost ceremonial celebration. Music, dancing, food, and that sense of community you only find when people depend on the land and on each other. We were both in high spirits, and although I'd had a few drinks, I still had enough sense to know driving wasn't the best idea right away. I've always been careful about things like that, so I suggested we wait a while before getting in the car. My wife was even more tipsy than I was, so letting her drive wasn't even on the table. We ended up staying a bit longer, chatting and laughing, until I felt clear-headed enough to take us home. By the time we finally got on the road, it was already past 1 a.m. Thankfully, the route to the farm was mostly straight, except for a few winding turns near our property and the edge of the forest. But I knew those curves by heart, like they were etched into my bones. I knew when to slow down, when to steer, where the fog usually settles. We got home at 2:05. We were still riding high from the night, and the drive back had been smooth, so we didn't immediately realize something was terribly wrong on the farm. We came in laughing, stumbling a bit, just relieved to be home safe. We thought about going straight to bed, but the buzz was still in our veins. So we decided to sit on the living room couch for a while, talking and holding on to that joyful feeling a little longer. Then, suddenly, my wife turned to me with a tone more sober than I expected, and asked if I'd seen something pass in front of the window. I looked where she pointed, but all I could see was the cold light of the moon outlining the trees beyond the house. Still, the mood shifted instantly. That faint electricity in the air. What had moments before felt like fun, now turned into something tense, heavy. My wife moved closer to the window, her face tight with focus, and said, with a conviction that left no room for doubt, that she was absolutely certain she saw something pass by. I suggested, hesitantly, that it might have been a deer, not uncommon this time of year. But she shook her head and said that even if it was, she'd feel better if we locked every door and window. So we did just that. When I was locking the kitchen shutters, I noticed something that chilled my blood. There were footprints in the damp earth, visible in the faint outdoor light reflecting off the indentations. I leaned closer to study them. The pattern looked familiar, eerily similar to the kind my field boots leave behind. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't remember walking through that spot recently. And the placement of the footprints was deeply unsettling. They were right beneath the window, as if someone had stood there, watching, listening, or worse, trying to open it. I didn't say anything to my wife to avoid alarming her, but from that moment on, my mindset changed completely. I returned to her side, and that's when we heard the knocks at the front door. We looked at each other, the color draining from our faces, and we knew, without a doubt, that something was very wrong. No one, absolutely no one, knocks on our door unannounced. Not at that hour. The road from the farm's gate to the house is long and winding, and the mere fact that someone had reached the door without us hearing a vehicle or footsteps was disturbing in itself. I got up, hesitantly, intending to ask who it was, but my wife grabbed my arm and whispered that maybe it would be better to pretend we weren't home. I told her that whoever was out there already knew we were inside. We'd just gotten home, turned on lights, closed windows, made noise. The intruder had to know. I approached the door and asked, in a steady but controlled voice, who it was. On the other side, a man's voice answered that he was lost and needed help. The voice sounded oddly familiar, but I couldn't place it. I asked him to identify himself, and he said his name was Jimmy, that he lived nearby with his wife and daughter, and that both of them were scared, waiting in the car. Right then, I knew, just as surely as I know my own name, that he was lying. I knew every person who lived in that area, and there was no Jimmy. Still, I played along, told him to hold on while I went to get a phone. I looked at my wife, who immediately ran to the bedroom to grab the guns. I asked the man if he wanted me to call the police, to which he replied, way too quickly, that it wasn't necessary, that he just needed a phone, and that his daughter had to use the bathroom. I asked if the girl could say a few words. He responded with a silence that was long, uncomfortable, and told me more than any answer ever could. He was clearly thinking about what to say next. Then he said she wasn't actually with him, that she was scared, but waiting. By now, the act was over. We both knew that we both knew. That's when the man screamed that if we didn't open the door, he'd break it down, and fired a shot at the glass, which shattered in a sudden spray of shards. Luckily, I wasn't standing too close. I was checking if my wife had returned, and I wasn't hit. He was yelling that we were surrounded, and that the police would take at least an hour to get there, which he pointed out was more than enough time for him to do whatever he wanted. And I knew he was right. This wasn't just about holding our ground anymore. It was about staying alive. He was coming in, whether we liked it or not. But as long as I had a say in it, we weren't going down without a fight. My wife had come to the same conclusion. She grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the basement. Down there was an old passage used back in her grandparents' day as a secret route between the main house and the servants' quarters. It was nearly forgotten now, just a cluttered storage space, but it might buy us the time we needed. I told her to go clear the doorway while I went to grab more weapons and create a distraction. I wanted the intruders to think we were barricaded in one of the rooms. By the time I came back, I could already hear the upstairs windows giving way. It wasn't just 2 or 3 of them. It was many. We slipped into the passage and locked the heavy wooden door behind us. Old as it was still strong enough to slow them down. We made our way through the narrow stone tunnel, pressed close together, our steps firm, despite the fear, our hearts pounding loud enough to echo off the walls. On the other side, we unlocked the door with the utmost care. The servant's house was intact, but through the windows we saw flashlights moving around the main house. We counted at least 5, maybe more. We knew we couldn't stay there. We had to enter the forest, even though we'd always lived by the rule to never cross it at night. But we'd take our chances with the woods, rather than those men. Just as we reached the tree line, we heard, faint in the distance, our front door finally give in. We slipped into the darkness of the forest. We knew the house would be destroyed. But we were alive. No one ever found out who they were. Based on the footprints, police estimated at least 13 men. No fingerprints, and the house was left in ruins. The walls held up, but many were riddled with holes. Every piece of furniture had been torn apart or smashed to pieces. The kind of fury I never imagined a human being could hold. We stayed with our neighbors for a long while. They were incredible to us, never once making us feel like intruders or a burden. When we finally returned home, the nightmares came back too. I'd wake up several times during the night, convinced I was hearing noises. I started trying to match that man's voice to every man I came across. I knew I'd heard it before it all happened. And more than once I wondered if I'd done something to cause that kind of fury. If I'd ever wronged someone so deeply that they carried a grudge like that. But no matter how much I try to piece it together, nothing ever comes to mind. My wife tells me I need to let it go. That if I don't, it's going to eat me alive. And I know she's right. But knowing something in theory and being able to put it into practice are 2 very different things. I don't think I'll ever truly be at peace until I understand why it happened. And yet, at the same time, I hope I never see them again for as long as I live. What I'm about to tell you happened 13 years ago, but it feels like it happened yesterday. When I close my eyes, I can still see everything with terrifying clarity. Even now, my right arm is completely useless, no matter how much physical therapy I do. Even now, I'm afraid to fall asleep and lose my grip on who I am. And worst of all, even now, I still have the exact same unanswered questions I had 13 years ago. The year before it happened, my best friend Scott and I had planned a short hike. We both live in Maryland, and, being avid hikers, we traveled far from home plenty of times, even did a good stretch of the Pacific Crest Trail, but never the Appalachians. So, that year, we decided it was finally time. But the plans went out the window when Scott got food poisoning after eating at a seafood restaurant. It was so bad he was completely unable to travel, and I ended up spending the entire time with him at the hospital. We postponed our plans and agreed that the following year, no matter what, we'd make it happen. But when that year came around, Scott got promoted at work and told me that it was just impossible for him to take time off. He felt bad about it, but told me that if I still wanted to go, I should absolutely feel free to go alone. Hiking solo was something that had never really crossed my mind, not because I thought it was impossible, but because I'd always done it with Scott. I started thinking seriously about it, and decided I was going. I had no one else who shared this passion, and as long as I prepared properly, I couldn't see any reason not to do it. I had more than enough experience. I planned everything down to the last detail and set off. The original plan was to do a 5-day hike, but since I was going solo, I decided to cut it down to 3 and avoid the more remote areas. I could always come back later and explore those spots with Scott. With the rising temperatures, the trail was crowded, especially in the early sections. It wasn't ideal, but being on my own, I didn't mind much. I knew it was always like this during peak season, and that once I pushed a little farther, I'd start seeing fewer people. Maybe even reach stretches where I'd see no one at all. At least, that's what I was hoping for. By the end of the first day, just before I started looking for a good place to set up my tent, there were noticeably fewer people around. That's when I ran into this guy who said his name was Derek. I was taking a break, eating a quick snack, when he showed up, seemingly out of nowhere, and struck up a conversation. He said he had just seen one of the most beautiful landscapes of his life, and that in all his years of hiking, that moment had been the highlight. The interaction was weird. He literally looked like a businessman talking to me in the middle of the woods. He didn't look like a hiker at all. He seemed completely out of place. Too well groomed, skin so pale it looked like he hadn't seen sunlight in years, and the way he talked was anything but casual. He told me he'd been out there for a week, but there was nothing about him that suggested that. Not the smell, not the clothes, not the skin tone. And the strangest part was the almost rehearsed conviction in his voice when he talked about that view, like he was literally pitching it. Now, so many years later, the strangeness is something I can see clearly, but at the time, I didn't make the connection and just accepted that he was someone a little odd. He kept repeating that it was something I could miss, that it wasn't on any maps and was rarely mentioned because hardly anyone knew about it. I'll admit, it made me uncomfortable. The guy was weird. The insistence was weird. But after he walked off and wished me a good hike, I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if it really was something worth seeing? Sure, the guy was strange, but there are plenty of weird people in this world. Being strange doesn't mean someone has a whole hidden agenda. Okay, in that context, it was a little bizarre, but I never once felt threatened by him. So, I decided I'd check it out. He had been pretty specific about the path I should take to see the view. It was a short detour off the main trail, something I could do in 2 or 3 hours tops, and I had to follow that route exactly because, according to him, the others weren't safe. It was already getting dark, so I decided to find a place to pitch my tent. The next day, I'd explore that area he mentioned. I stepped off the trail a bit and set up camp. The night was calm, uneventful, and I woke up in the morning with that rare feeling of total rest. So I got up early, and in my innocence, or stupidity, I went down the path the man had described. It didn't take long before things started going wrong. I'd been walking for about an hour when I heard a slight rustling in the trees. I looked over right away but didn't see anything. Still, I had this undeniable feeling that someone was watching me. Anyone who hikes in remote areas knows that feeling. It's not uncommon. Sometimes, it's just your brain playing tricks on you. I tried to convince myself that was all it was, and kept going. The area was clearly underused. Even though he said there was a trail, it was obvious that no one had used it in years. Overgrown with tall weeds, uneven ground, dry branches everywhere. I was starting to get irritated. Felt like I'd been walking way longer than I should have. When suddenly the ground gave way beneath my feet. It was, without a doubt, one of the worst sensations I've ever felt in my life. I fell into a huge pit. The ground just vanished. I slammed my entire body, hit my head, and the pain in my right arm was so sharp it took the air out of my lungs. Everything went black. It took me several minutes before I could make sense of anything. The pain in my arm was unbearable. When I looked, I panicked. There was a stick pierced through my arm. not just some random branch. The tip was clearly sharpened by hand, like a stake made to puncture. The ground was damp, covered in leaves and sticks. Everything arranged in a weird way. That hole had been made by someone. My head was throbbing, whether from the blow, the state of my arm, or just sheer shock, I don't know. And that's when it hit me. It had all been set up by that man. The insistence, the scripted pitch, the emphasis on the only safe path, his unnatural appearance. It all made sense now. I had been followed. I tried to assess the pit. It was deep. The earth was loose. No way to climb out, especially not with my arm like that. I thought about yelling, but quickly realized it was useless. I was alone, far from any main trail. I started feeling dizzy, my eyelids heavy. And that's when I heard footsteps. Someone was approaching. I froze completely, didn't move a muscle, trapped like an animal in a snare. The footsteps stopped. Then, someone threw a black cover over the hole, blocking the light. And right after, a small canister dropped in, releasing gas. I know I was unconscious, or in some kind of unconscious state, for 9 days. I only remember fragments. I don't remember being pulled out of the pit. I don't remember the forest. What I do remember is being looked at by more than one person. Not just looked at, examined. I remember a woman stitching up my arm, and I remember being forced to eat. But it all feels like a nightmare someone else told me. Just scattered pieces that don't feel like they belong to my own life. What I remember most is being in a car and the woman who stitched me up was driving. She seemed scared and everything felt urgent. But I don't know if she was the one who was scared, or if it was just me. Then I remember being dropped off on the side of a road. And then, darkness again. I had no sense of time. No clue how long I'd been down there, just lying there helpless. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later. I woke up panicked, violent, not knowing where I was. I thought I was still in that place, with the woman stitching my arm. They had to sedate me. And when I finally came to my senses, the shock was even worse. It had been 12.5 days since I fell into that hole, and all I had were disjointed memories. A family had found me in Pennsylvania, on a back road several miles outside Allentown. The police took my statement. I never felt abandoned. They really tried. I gave them a full description of the man I met on the trail. As for the woman, as strange as it sounds, I can't describe her. I see her clearly in my mind, but I can't put that image into words, and I can't explain it. All I know is that somehow, I think she tried to help me. It's like the image I have of her is more emotional than visual. Maybe that's just trauma talking. Or maybe she was another victim trying to help someone else. The police believe I was caught in a human trafficking operation, and that after what happened to my arm, I was no longer useful. I don't know. All I know is that even now, 13 years later, I still have the same questions and no answers.